Safety first. The secret to processing narcissistic abuse trauma. I think there's an idea in the world of recovery from any sort of trauma, narcissistic abuse included, that it requires revisiting the feelings which were felt during the abuse, and that if those feelings are felt and those experiences re-examined sort of properly, then the survivor will be released from it all. And although that may work in some cases, I've found that in a lot of cases, there's a different path towards healing that operates, I think, on a very different principle. And let me tell you about an anonymous client that hopefully illustrates this other path towards healing. So Jermaine came to treatment when he was in his mid-20s, and he said he wanted help feeling more confident at work in his role as a manager at a home construction company, to feel happier in his relationship with his girlfriend, and to pursue hobbies that would bring him happiness and purpose. Jermaine had also survived a very narcissistically abusive family where he faced near daily emotional and physical abuse from his father. And he learned to soothe himself by drinking alcohol during his teens and early 20s, and was still susceptible to periodic binges here and there, when he felt stressed. Jermaine started working in therapy under his assumption that he needed to talk really in depth about the ways his narcissistically abusive father had demeaned, intimidated, and dehumanized him. And Jermaine would get a really kind of faraway look in his eyes when he would go into these details and would report wanting to have a drink after such sessions. Well, early in his treatment, as Jermaine started to go into a detailed recounting of when his father once threw him down a stairwell, his therapist said, hey, Jermaine, where would you say you are right now from 0 to 10 in terms of your stress level? And Jermaine kind of searched himself a bit and said, probably a 7. And his therapist then said, right, that was my sense. You're describing something really upsetting that you survived, and our goal here is for you to eventually both know what happened, but in a way that makes it clear to you and your nervous system that you are safe now. And my concern is that we haven't done enough work on shoring up your sense of safety in your life today to productively examine what you went through yet. And Jermaine asked, well, what do you mean? That I should talk about other things in my life rather than all the messed up stuff that my dad put me through? I mean, isn't the point that we go over these things so that they don't affect me so much? And then his therapist said, well, sort of, but our systems are very wise when it comes to healing from the kind of trauma you went through. And when we take care of our nervous systems and nourish ourselves in the present, then the knowledge we need to put the past to rest usually kind of spontaneously emerges. So what if we did some breathing exercises to get you down to a 3 or 4 on that scale? And I'd like for you to tell me if at any point you get above a 4 in the rest of today's session, so we can stop and do some breathing to get you back down to a 3 or a 4. And I'll invite you to use the time in therapy for today and ongoing to talk about the goals you mentioned at the start of our work. I remember you wanted to feel more confident at work, happier in your relationship, and to pursue interests that brought you satisfaction. Well, Jermaine was shocked that talking about what was important to him right now was actually okay to do in therapy. But he went ahead and talked about what got in his way of feeling more confident in his managerial abilities. And then this led to him understanding how he had to downplay his abilities to avoid attack in his family. And he grew to consider that it may now be safe for him to give himself credit in this way. So Jermaine's focus on what he wanted in his current life and using therapy to help him move through the felt obstacles in his way led to him feeling much stronger and safer in his life today. And so after a few months of working in this way in therapy, Jermaine said, it's strange, but I have a different relationship to what happened to me back then. Somehow living my life in the ways we've discussed here lets me see how wrong and cruel my dad was for doing to me what he did. But I don't think I could have felt this way if I hadn't first embraced my strengths like we've done here. And Jermaine then had a spontaneous feeling that brought him to tears as it washed over him. And he said, wow, these feelings are really different. They feel like they're helping me heal. They're not kind of keeping me stuck or feeling sunk. And his therapist said, well, you've done the work needed to know that it's now safe for you to feel the compassion and sorrow for yourself that I don't think it's been safe to do just yet. I think we often need to first get to a place of safety before it's even possible to experience the kind of feelings you just experienced. And I want to bring up the fictionalized case of Germaine to illustrate how important it can often be to first build a sense of safety in your current life before looking to process the trauma that you have survived. And this can especially apply to scapegoat survivors of narcissistic abuse. And in today's video, I'll explain why it's so important to find safety in your current life and to take appropriate measures to build that sense of safety, particularly if you find that trying to re-examine past narcissistic abuse is leaving you more stuck rather than feeling more healed and moving through it. And I hope you'll watch until the end because I'm going to point you towards a free resource that's tailored to help survivors of narcissistic abuse build just this kind of safety in their current lives. Well, my name's Jay Reed and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California, specializing in helping individuals recover from narcissistic abuse both in individual therapy and through my online course and accompanying private Facebook community. So we take a three-pronged approach to recovery that involves making sense of what happened, gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser, whether it's psychological, emotional, or even physical distance, and living in defiance of the narcissist rules. Today's video falls under two categories, actually, of living in defiance of the narcissist rules and gaining distance from the narcissistic abuser. And you can find all my videos categorized according to these three categories in the different playlists on this channel. Well, if you were a scapegoat survivor of a narcissistic parent or partner, then I really encourage you to check out my free ebook on this topic. It's called Surviving Narcissistic Abuse as a Scapegoat, and it goes into other important aspects of what it's like to be in the shoes of the scapegoat child or partner of a narcissistic abuser. Whether it's from self-limiting beliefs about yourself that you must adopt in order to survive, or why the narcissistic personality is so geared to put those closest to them down. And I think along with today's video, this ebook can help you realize how none of the abuse was your fault, but was rather the product of the narcissist's psychological and emotional problems. And you can find the link to the book in the description box below or by clicking here. And if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and turn notifications on so that you're alerted when I post new videos on these kinds of topics. So, do you have to feel worse before you can feel better? You know, we often see in movies and TV shows where therapy is depicted as a process of someone revisiting buried feelings that need to be experienced. And once this happens, the client is then freed from the suffering that his denial of these feelings was causing him. And for some clients, this may be a great map for the process of therapy. In essence, that one must feel worse before it's possible to then feel better. But do some need to feel better before they can safely feel worse? I think for others, including sometimes scapegoat survivors of narcissistic abuse, a different sequence for healing does apply. In these cases, it is often first necessary to feel better before you can safely feel worse. And Germaine's case above is a great example of this. You know, his family used him as a scapegoat and blamed him for their problems while undermining his ability to solve those problems. So for instance, at family dinners, his father would typically find something Germaine was doing to criticize him for having poor table manners, often putting his elbows on the dining room table, even if briefly. Then his father would launch into a tirade about how disrespectful and immature Germaine was, and that he was not going to stop getting on Germaine's case until Germaine learned to have good table manners like the rest of the family. Well, Germaine would feel like he couldn't even win in these circumstances because he sort of unconsciously knew that if he didn't put his elbows on the table, his father would definitely find some other excuse to attack him. So this left Germaine feeling like he couldn't do anything right in his life. Now, for people who have survived the same kind of treatment Germaine did, as exemplified in these family dinners, the process of closely examining this type of abuse may be less preferable to shoring up your sense that you can, in fact, do a lot of things right in the world. And here's why. When we suffer a trauma like narcissistic abuse, the only thing to do when it's happening is to survive it. And at the same time, such traumatic experience tends to get encoded in our minds and brains in a vivid and almost fixed way in our minds. So when we go back to these memories, there is often this sort of oddness that can happen where all we are aware of is the event, being played in our mind. So when Jermaine would recall that, what he would remember is his father berating him, and he wouldn't have a sense of himself in that moment. So in some ways, it was like he was subjecting himself to that same episode of abuse when he recalled it in this manner. So when we recollect periods in which we were being abused, it can be very difficult to stay connected to oneself in the present. And as a result, it can be even harder to know that you have in fact survived the abuse and that now growth is possible. Rather, it can result in a reinforcement of that fixation on what happened, coupled with the vividness that often accompanies such traumatic memories. For Jermaine, he found much more helpful the tactic of first acting in and out of therapy as if growth was possible for him. Then and only then could he regard what his family put him through from a vantage point that allowed him to know he had already survived and escaped it. And that let him feel his grief for having been through something that he certainly didn't deserve and was tragic that he had to experience. I think it's important to not regard Jermaine's focus on matters in his day-to-day life in the therapy as avoiding dealing with his trauma. In fact, by shifting his attention to what was important to him in his current life, he was escaping the fixation of attention that can so often happen after this kind of trauma. And I'd also argue that his focus on what he wanted in his current life implicitly challenged his narcissistic father's rule that he didn't deserve anything good in his life because he was supposedly defective in some way. For someone like Jermaine, the notion that he must first process trauma before he can live his life could actually risk reinforcing his father's message that there was something wrong with him and he therefore did not deserve the same rights that everyone else does. And I think this notion of safety first is not just a shot from the hip. It actually is the basis of a type of therapy I practice known as control mastery theory. And in this theory of therapy, the idea is that the client must first experience a specific sense of safety in the therapeutic relationship before they can achieve insight into the traumas they have survived. It also puts forth that clients are independently motivated to find such safety in the therapy so that they can achieve the growth they desire. And I think Jermaine, in this example, did this when he told his therapist his 3 goals at the start of their therapy. And his therapist picked up on this and showed great flexibility in reorienting the therapy around these goals, which may have sent the message to Jermaine that it was safe to treat himself like he was a whole and intact person and deserving of going after what he wants. And that once he felt safe in doing this, he could, again, safely look at how undeservedly cruel his narcissistic father was to him. So this approach to healing from narcissistic abuse involves feeling good before safely feeling worse in order to heal. And I'd like to talk about an important resource for building your current sense of safety in your life. I've developed a resource specifically designed to help survivors of narcissistic abuse recover and build up a sense of safety in their own lives. And it's a free webinar that covers 7 self-care strategies that can immediately shift your focus to the quality of current experience and keep that in the center of your life. And you can find the link to the webinar in the description box below or by clicking here. And with continued practice and time, these strategies can generate a sense of deservedness in yourself that you deserve your own care and attention in the here and now. And I think that's the biggest benefit of this webinar beyond the tactics themselves. But of course, one needs to practice those tactics to attain this overarching benefit. So here are the self-care strategies that we cover in the webinar. Under the category of developing a compassionate attitude towards yourself, there's 2 tools. The first is learning to practice patience with yourself. The next is practicing gratitude towards yourself. And there's 2 specific exercises that lead you through that. The next category is strengthening your mind-body connection. There are 3 self-care tools along these lines. First is learning to use your breath to pay attention to and reconnect to a source of calm and ease within your body. The next tool is making sure to move, and it involves a wonderful exercise that really helps you vitalize your connection to yourself and your body, and I think is really best just experienced rather than me talking too much about it. And the third is learning to eat as an act of care towards yourself. And the third category involves recognizing your strengths. And that involves 2 self-care tools, the respect survey, and then understanding how the well-adjusted world or safe others see you. And again, 2 specific exercises to help you do that. And if you haven't already, I highly encourage you to check out this free webinar and see what happens if you apply these strategies consistently for 1 month. And be sure to write in your journal at the start of that month and at the end so that you can see what changes you experience or even benefit from. Well, I hope you found today's video useful. It's a principle that I think is really, really important in this process of recovery from narcissistic abuse, and maybe even feels or can feel counterintuitive, because I think there's a lot of grit that scapegoat survivors have, and sort of this sometimes this ethos that, like, well, I'm just going to bear with it. I'm going to tolerate the distress of remembering what I was put through, and perhaps by doing so, I'll sort of be steeled from it all. And again, that toughness and that grit is incredible, always to be admired. But sometimes the process of kind of recovering your own quality of life is tricky. It's like, I always use the example of those Chinese finger cuffs. They're like bamboo things that, you put your fingers in them, and when you pull really hard, they just get tighter. Spoiler alert, it's going to ruin Chinese finger cuffs for everyone, but the way to get out of them is actually pushing the fingers inward, which seems like counterintuitive because you're like going deeper into the sort of trap. But by doing so, it loosens up the bamboo straps and you can pull your fingers out. But anyway, that kind of counterintuitiveness often happens, I think, in this process of recovery. And I think this notion of sort of prioritizing your own sense of safety and what feels good can be just one of those kind of counterintuitive measures that can really be impactful in the process of recovery. Okay, well, thank you again for your attention watching this video and continued support of this channel. It's always just such a pleasure to be able to post these videos and to read the comments and know that you found them helpful, and to see everyone commenting too in such a supportive, validating way with each other. And I look forward to posting again next Sunday. Take care.